I'm your host, Scary Pops, and everybody loves a good scare, so let's get into it.
The killer in the back seat. Urban legend. The girl driving the old blue sedan was a senior at the high school. She lived on a farm about 8 miles away and used the car to drive back and forth. She had driven into town that night to see a basketball game. Now she was on her way home. As she pulled away from the school, she noticed a red pickup truck follow her out of the parking lot. A few minutes later, the truck was still behind her. "I guess we're going in the same direction," she thought. She began to watch the truck in her mirror. When she changed her speed, the driver of the truck changed his speed. When she passed a car, so did he. Then he turned on his high beams, flooding her car with light. He left them on for almost a minute. "He probably wants to pass me," she thought. But she was becoming uneasy. Usually she drove home over the back road. Not too many people went that way. But when she turned onto that road, so did the truck. "I've got to get away from him," she thought, and began to drive faster. Then he turned his high beams on again. After a minute, he turned them off. Then he turned them on again and off again. She drove even faster, but the truck driver stayed right behind her. Then he turned his high beams on again. Once more her car was ablaze with light. What is he doing? She wondered. What does he want? Then he turned them off again. But a minute later he had them on again and left them on. At last she pulled into her driveway, and the truck pulled in right behind her. She jumped from the car and to the house. "Call the police," she screamed at her father. Out in the driveway, she could see the driver of the truck. He had a gun in his hand. When the police arrived, they started to arrest him. But he pointed to the girl's car. "You don't want me," he said. "You want him." Crouched behind the driver's seat, there was a man with a knife. As the driver of the truck explained it, the man slipped into the girl's car just before she left the school. He saw it happen, but there was no way he could stop it. He thought about getting the police, but he was afraid to leave her, so he followed her car. Each time the man in the back seat reached up to overpower her, the driver of the truck turned on his high beams. Then the man dropped down, afraid that someone might see him.
What happened? Why are my feet wet? Alex thought to herself as she slowly opened her eyes in the driver's seat of her car. Her head resting against the steering wheel, and the haze in her vision was beginning to clear, but the haze in her mind was not. What happened? Why are my feet wet? She continued to ask herself until she realized she couldn't see anything out of the windows except dark, murky water lit up by the dying headlights of her car. Panic began to sink in as Alex realized why her feet were wet. "I'm sinking. The car is sinking. What happened?" Alex's thoughts raced frantically as she tried to evaluate the situation she now found herself in. Instinct and panic led to her grab the door handle and push it, but with no luck. The door was locked. After realizing the door was locked and that she had not fully found her way out of the haze, she unlocked the door. But even after the door was unlocked, it wouldn't budge. It was impossible to open with the pressure of the water bearing down on the car. The panic started to rise inside Alex faster than the water level in the car. Hyperventilating, Alex screamed for help, but no one could hear her. Tears ran down her face as she looked for an option out of the sinking car. As she glanced in the rearview mirror, she saw blood streaming from a gash in her brow, coloring her tears an unnatural red. "I'm bleeding," she thought. Then she noticed blood on the steering wheel, and she said, "I'm going to have to get all this blood out of my car," she thought, before realizing this was the least of her problems. Then panic set in once again. She needed to find a way out of the car. and her thoughts were sealing her fate inside as she was panicking through the sinking tomb. A single deep breath was all she could spare to collect her thoughts, but it worked for now. The window! I'll break the window, Alex thought. Looking around the car, there was nothing except her purse on the floor. Alex had always been particularly tidy and thus never left anything just random in her car. There wasn't even trash in the cup holder, let alone something big and heavy to break the window with. Even her purse only had her wallet and a little bit of makeup and her phone. Wait, my phone! Alex lunged at her feet for her purse to grab her cell phone from it. She fished the bag out of the rising water and grabbed her waterlogged cell phone. Panic and desperation blocked her mind from even registering that the phone was not usable. She frantically tapped on the screen and pushed every button before throwing it in a tantrum. Then the thought of using the car keys came to mind. I can put the keys between my fingers, Alex thought. That should be sharp enough to break the glass. Alex reached for the ignition and pulled out the keys. This created a problem when the headlights turned off, and suddenly Alex was thrust into darkness. Blindly, she reached up for the dome light and flipped it on. But it was flickering and dim. It would work for now. And the keys between her fingers. She reared back her right fist and swung it as hard as she could at the driver's side window. Boom! But nothing came of the swing, but a horrible pain in her hand. Once more, she cocked back and gave it all she could. Bloody knuckles and even more pain was the only thing that the swing accomplished. Tears streaming down her face. Alex leaned back and put her entire body in the final attempt. Alex sat and looked at her blood on the window and dropped the keys as tears came in a great volume. It felt like a lifetime, but it was barely 30 seconds since Alex had come to, and with her hand throbbing and bloody, Alex decided it was time to use her legs to kick the window open. While trying to position herself, she realized she was buckled in, so she unclicked the seatbelt and went to take it off when she realized it was stuck. Oh no, her stomach dropped as she realized not only was she trapped in the sinking car, but she was trapped in the driver's seat as well. She began to tug and pull on the seatbelts with her bloody hand, realizing it was causing her too much pain. Her grip wasn't strong enough. Down to a single hand, she grasped the buckle and in desperation tugged at it, increasing the force as she let out a scream. It took all the oxygen out of her lungs, but the seatbelt gave way as she struggled for air. She was free, but still trapped. She laid across the front seats and cocked her legs back, ready to kick the window out and free herself. Just like the first punch, the first kick resulted in pain. Using both heels on the second attempt, Alex kicked the window. It felt like the bones in her feet were starting to crack, but the window stayed completely intact. And out of desperation, she kicked the window with everything she had inside her. But it was going to break before it broke her foot. Out of options, Alex watched as the water rose steadily in the car. It was up to the bottom of the steering wheel now, and it was cold. It was so cold. In the middle of summer, why is the water so damn cold, she thought. The car was tilting forward as the weight of the engine pulled it down into the abyss. Alex had no clue how deep the water was. She just knew it was dark, cold, and rising faster with every second she hesitated. She didn't even know which body of water she was in. She could barely remember driving. Was she drunk? No, she hadn't had a drink in months. She thought to herself, I always go out with my friends and have a good time on the weekends, and basically I'm sober. So then finally, the realization kicked in. This was no longer a fight for just her life. This was a fight for the lives of those in the car, the lives of two people occupying Monica's body. Monica was solely responsible for them both. Her failure meant the death of two now, not one. She became more frantic as the water moved past her waist. She clambered in the back seat as the water started to engulf the front of the car. Alex tried to open the back doors and the windows, but no success. Her hand was still bloody from punching the driver's side window. She knew that wasn't an option. She screamed as she laid down across the back seat and tried kicking the windows again. Her feet were hurting and the glass wasn't budging. She couldn't muster another kick. as the pain became too much in her fragile feet. The front seats were underwater, and the back seat was starting to submerge. At this moment, Alex heard what sounded like the crack of glass giving way. She looked at the window nearest her and saw nothing but marks from her shoes. So she dove under the water, pulling herself towards the front to find the source of the cracking glass. She touched the driver's side window and it felt like a newly formed blemish. All the pain she was in seemed to be worth it with this discovery. This was it. This was the way out. At this point, the dome light was underwater and giving Alex a minor sense of direction in the murky water. She came back to the back seat for air and quickly dove down again to the driver's side. She was determined to kick this window out and free herself and her child. However, her kicks, they were weak. They weren't even causing her feet pain anymore. Alex screamed with the last attempt, muffled by the water as the air bubbles rose. And Alex swam to the back and resurfaced to find herself near the rear window, clinging to what little air was left in the car. The water was soon to take over the whole car and leave her with nothing. No air. Nothing but the water to breathe into her lungs. And with her head pressed against the back window, fighting for each breath, Alex was scared not only for her life, but the life of the child she was carrying as well. Alex had never been a religious person, but in the moments of desperation, any God is a God worth pleading to. Please, God, please, let me out of this car. I swear I will do anything. I need a miracle. Alex begged. I need to live, not for me, but for my baby. Please, let the window shatter so I can swim to safety. Please do anything. Do you hear me? Help! Alex pleaded as the water took her head underneath, and she took her last breath of fresh air. The dome light faded, and the darkness became. God never answered.
I had just gotten out of work at 11 p.m. and was heading back to my house. It's about a 45-minute drive to get home usually, as I live several miles outside of the city. It's always very quiet, and the roads are pretty empty once I start to get further out and closer to home. I always enjoyed the drives back from work. I found them peaceful and just a nice way to wind down after a long day. I was 20 minutes away from home and just turned down a long side road that pretty much leads directly to my house. This was my usual route home that I'd been taking for years now, and I'd never had anything happen before. I will admit though, it was a bit of a creepy road at night. It was very dimly lit, and the sides of the road were surrounded by a dense forest. Not to mention, it would often get foggy during the later hours of the night, making things only visible within a few feet ahead. Again though, barely anyone is on this road at night, and there's no turns or anything, so visibility is never too much of an issue. Though a couple minutes down the road, I see through the fog a small blinking light. I couldn't really tell how far ahead it was, or even what side of the road it was on. I slowed down, and as I started to get closer, the light turned off completely. At this point, I was maybe going 15 to 20 miles per hour, when out of the fog, a small car pulls out from the side of the road and stops directly in front of me. I tried to brake, but I was too close already, and my car tapped the back of theirs. I was kind of in shock at first as to how suddenly it all happened, but I noticed neither of our cars really had much damage. Not really knowing what to do, I opened my door and stood beside my car, waiting for them to get out as well. I could see them moving around in the front seat, but I couldn't tell what they were doing. As I stood there, I looked at his car, noticing how old and worn it was and that the headlights were all turned off. Eventually, a man got out of the car slowly and began making his way over to me. From what I could see, he looked like a middle-aged man and was a pretty large guy. I decided to start off and asked, "Is everything okay? You pulled out pretty quick." He was acting a little strange, and looking all around and never making eye contact with me. After a couple seconds, he replied, "Yeah, sorry." I wasn't really sure how to respond, but he was starting to really make me uncomfortable, and I didn't want to be out on an empty road alone with him. I told him that there was no real damage to either car, so I was going to get back on the road and head home. But as I began reaching for my car door, he told me to wait. He told me he wanted to check his car out for damage before I left. I said okay and stood next to my car as he looked at his back bumper. But then he started to walk around his car, pretending to look at it for damage, which was really weird because I'd only tapped his back bumper. As he started to make his way to the passenger side, I saw a large figure get up in the back seat and start moving towards the door. I immediately got in my car and locked it as a man got out of the back door, and both of them began waving their hands at me, telling me to stop. I was panicking at this point and put the car in drive and went around them down the road. Looking in the rearview mirror, I could see their lights turn on through the fog. I could see their lights for about 30 seconds, but eventually they faded out. I pulled into a gas station that was about 5 minutes from my house and waited there just to make sure that they didn't follow me home. But the car never passed by. After waiting for 15 minutes, I headed home. I decided not to call the cops at the time, as I wasn't entirely sure if I was just overreacting or not. I'm still not sure what those people really wanted, but the more I think about it, everything about that situation felt wrong. I don't know what their plan was, but part of me feels like something very dangerous was about to happen if I had not gotten out of there in time. Another part of me wishes I had reported the incident, as I find myself wondering, what if they had stopped following me so that they could try and lure someone else into their trap?